Hello, this is Dr. Jeff Baldwin from Space Coast Cyber. Today is August 31st, 2022. I always like to put a date on content because a lot of this information does change over time. But today we're going to be doing a review of the Certified CMMC Professional Test Blueprint. So what does that mean? I got a couple slides to cover, and then we'll just basically go over those things in more detail. So the first thing is, if you're at this video and you don't know what CMMC is, well, CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Essentially, there are some requirements from DFARS that say you have to protect CUI, and they point you to when you have CUI in a covered contract information system, you have to protect it with NIST Special Publication 800-171. So CMMC, the main goal of it is to provide a third-party assessment to give a level of assurance to the Department of Defense that you are actually following and meeting those requirements. So CMMC level 2 maps directly to the 800-171. So what is the CMMC certified professional, or the certified CMMC professional? So it's the first certification, an individual certification that an individual can get, and it's required to be an assessment team member for CMMC, and it's a precursor to become a certified CMMC assessor. So essentially what that means is under the CMMC 2.0 model, the CCP can be part of the assessment team, but they're only going to be permitted to lead the assessment of level 1 practices. So with that, why should you take the CCP? So the best way to prepare for a third-party assessment is to perform an assessment using the same process and methodology that the assessors are going to use. So in my opinion, a self-assessment, anything that an organization seeking certification or an OSC does, they should be following the same process that a C3PO would do. And that C3PO, again, stands for CMMC Third-Party Assessment Organization. So really the only difference really should be just the level of independence. So if you're doing a self-assessment, you have management influence, you're not in an unbiased party, right? So with the C3PO, they are theoretically an unbiased party that is third party level of independence. So when they perform their assessment, it should look the same. That's my opinion. So what are we going to do today? First, we're going to go to the Cyber AB website. We're going to look over what those CCP requirements are. We're actually going to review the blueprint. And just kind of as a note, the CCP exam is projected to be publicly available in October 2022. Currently, right now, it is under beta. So there is a beta exam. I know a couple people have taken it. I'm scheduled to take it mid-September. Since I haven't taken it, I feel like I should be allowed to talk about the exam a little bit in the blueprint and what I expect to be on there. And since I haven't taken it, I'm not under the NDA yet. So at the end, we got the contacts. So how you can contact me. Space Coast Cyber is a licensed training provider, and we do have courses that are starting in October 2022. So you can reach out for more information about that, or you can register. So with that, let's get started. So first thing first, if you've never been there, you can just Google DoD CMMC. You go down a few. Looks like some people paid for some ads. Well done. But here's the government site. So if you need a little more information about really what that looks like, this is the CMMC. So it got the about and the model. Like I was mentioning before, we're under CMMC 2.0 currently. And that's why I date things, because, you know, a year from now we could be under 3.0. So with that, if you go to cyberab.org, that will give you to the ecosystem page. So when you go to the ecosystem, there's different roles. We mentioned the OSCs, consulting and implementation, and then the assessing and certification. One thing to note is that a CCP can also consult, but if you consult for a company, you can't then assess the company that you've consulted for. Makes sense, right? So if you go to the ecosystem professions, here we go. Here's where you find the blueprint. So a couple things that are required. US is not required. but you will not participate. And if you are going to be on the team member, then you do need a US person as a team member. So here's the blueprint for that. Just as a note, the CCA training is not available yet, but the blueprint is out there. So what you can do is you can look at the differences between the two. So I'll just open up the blueprints like that. So under 1.0, the CCP contained more information in it. The blueprint did. So now a lot of that information has been pulled out of CCP and is now in the CCA. All right, so here we are into the blueprint. So here is the blueprint. That's how you get to it, is right here. So we have the blueprint here. First things first, the intended audience, employees of an OSC. I already mentioned that. Any of these folks can go get this. Here's the exam prerequisites. It's asking for a college degree or 2 years experience, or 2 years experience. And they suggest you have an A+ or equivalent knowledge for CompTIA. And then one of the unique things about CMMC is that you are required to take a course from an LTP. You can't do a self-study. You can't just sign up and take the exam. In order to be eligible to take the exam, you have to be on a roster that's been provided to the CMMC or the Cyber AV by a licensed training provider. So when you do take that LTP course, the LTPs have to use training material, or the CMMC approved training material, the CADAM. They have to use that. That's provided and licensed from a licensed publishing partner. And then there is the DoD CUI awareness training, which is good training, worth taking. And here's some of the TBDs. We don't know what's going to end up being, but there's the note. It's not an open book. So there is a lot of information here in this that you don't have an open book. So some of it's just going to be memorization. Some of it might be just understanding some of the concepts. So moving into the next part, we have domains. There is 6 domains in 2.0. So the first one is ecosystem, which is 5%. Code of professional conducts, that's another 5%. The governments and source documents, that's 15%. And then the model construct and implementation evaluation, 35%. And then the CMMC assessment process, which was just released in a draft not too long ago, I think last month. That's worth 25%. And then scoping, which is everybody's favorite topic. So you got 15% there. So 5% for ecosystem, it's pretty easy. This one's pretty easy. This is just understanding. So every domain has a task under it, or more, at least one task, but this one only has one. Other domains have more tasks. But you're identifying and compare the roles and responsibilities, requirements of authorities across the ecosystem. So the authorities, first one is OUSD, acquisition and sustainment, ANS. So here's the blueprint. What we've been told is that everything you're going to be tested on is on the blueprint. So if you want to know what's going to be on the exam, you look at the blueprint. So that's what we're doing now. So here we go from basic to advanced cyber hygiene. If you go back to this one, we have basic right here, and then we had actually they changed it. Let me see. So it used to go basic to advanced, and it looks like this may have not been updated for the exam, because with the 2.0 we have foundational advanced expert. So it's just kind of a distinction there just to be aware of. Basically, you know, as you start at the levels, it's like a pyramid, right? So everything is cumulative. So when you go up to level 2, you're still doing level 1. When you go up to level 3, you're still doing level 2 and level 1. So it accumulates as you go up. So that's kind of the concept to understand there. As you go up in levels, you get more practices and controls and processes you have to follow. So we that regulation DFARS 7012, we're adding the verification component. So that's kind of that first slide we hit on. We're adding that third-party verification. So that's kind of the main goal there. The DoD owns the model. So this is the DoD website. It's got some good information on here. The model itself is right here. And there's some glossary, and we'll touch on some of the documentation and the source documents. So moving on for now. So the ecosystem has different types of entities participating in it. If you look at the second level here, you have the CMMC AB, which is now known as the, interesting, they didn't change their headers, but the CMMC AB is now doing business as the Cyber AB for purposes of the exam. Any references to the Cyber AB will probably be using the old terminology of CMMC AB. Means the same thing. They're the same organization. This is still the legal name. Cyber AB is just the doing business as name. So the other high level thing there is the CAICO, or the CMMC Assessors and Instructors Certification Organization, which has not fully been stood up yet. So we'll get into that a little more detail here. So under each of these entities, there is organization and individuals. So for the AB side, which is the accreditation body that's looking more at organizations more so than anything else. So you have the OSCs, either the ones that are going to attempt to get a CMMC certificate so that they can then go win contracts with the DoD. You have the CMMC third-party assessment organizations. These are the ones that will be performing those assessments. And then you have the RPOs, which is the registered provider organization. So basically they have registered as an entity in the marketplace with the Cyber AB. So they get to be listed in that marketplace. So if you go back over here, there's the marketplace, and you can look at the RPOs and see who's on there. And then for individuals, they have RPs, or registered practitioners. These are not certified. There's no certification. They are just more or less registered. So they have, and they cannot participate in the assessments. So in their mind, this is the consulting side, right? As kind of a clean look, right? So you have consultants on this side of the fence, and then on this side of the fence, you have the assessors. So let's go down to the next section. So when you think of the CAICO, think more about the individuals, whereas up here, we're thinking more about organizations like C3POs, OSCs, and RPOs. This is just kind of incidental. I think it's mostly to fund the AB more than anything else. All right, so down in here for the CAICO organizations, we have the licensed partner publishers. I think I reversed that earlier in the video. They are the ones that create the CMMC authorized training material, and then the LTPs are the ones that would offer that training material. And then under the individuals, we have provisional assessors, who are the only ones that can really do assessments currently. And then there's provisional instructors that are the ones that are teaching in that. So one thing to note, these provisional assessors will eventually be sunset and replaced by CMMC certified assessors or certified CMMC assessor. So they will be replaced eventually. So once this certification is available, the PAs have 6 months to transition. And that's that timeline for sunsetting right there. And then the provisional instructor, same sort of thing. They will eventually be replaced by the certified CMMC instructor. In order to be an instructor, you have to have the certification at that level. So if you are a CCI and you want to teach a CCA, you also have to have a CCA. And then the CCP is the one we're talking about now, which is the first certification that is going to be available to individuals. And like I mentioned, that's going to be available in October as the plan. And then once that one's available, not shortly after, we'll have CCA. In order to sit for CCA, you have to get CCP first. So it's going to be a way up a ladder, essentially. And the assessment team member, that can be either a CCP, CCA, or a PA. And then the lead assessor, that can only be the PA or the CCA. So that was the first domain. Essentially, we look at all the different parts of the ecosystem, the organizations and the individuals, and the AB versus the CAICO. See how it's kind of separated by the kind of the certification of individuals versus the certification of organizations, and then the accreditation of C3POs to certify these organizations. Domain 2, Code of Professional Ethics. On the new website, it's hard to find it. Like I can't find it on this website. Like if I search ethics, it'll go to living our ethics, conflicts of interest. Actually, I think I searched on COPC, which is Code of Professional Conduct. It goes here, but it doesn't have a link to it, which is unfortunate. But if you go to here and you type in CMMC COPC, you'll get a version here from the old website. Well, I guess this is still the new website, but it isn't linked anywhere. So that's how you can find it. Basically, anybody in the ecosystem, anyone in the marketplace has to follow this code of professional conduct. On the blueprint, kind of hits on some of the main topics. So for studying for this, you would want to basically review this. And some of these guiding principles you definitely would want to understand, and all of them are defined down here. One of the key things is if you're going to do any consulting and any design work, you cannot go do an assessment of any company where you did consulting or design work, right? Because then you're basically assessing your own design and you're going to say it's great. That doesn't meet the level of independence required. So when you study, just make sure you understand all these concepts. One thing it could potentially see like as a question, right? If I was, putting my thinking hat on and like, who does it apply to? It applies to everybody, right? Another one would be, all right, here's, multiple choice. Here's 3 of them. And then there's a 4th one, and pick one, which one is not a part of which one is not a guiding principle. So you could have like professionalism, objectivity, confidentiality, NDAs, right? And you'd be like, nope, NDAs is not one of the guiding principles. So that's something I would kind of expect to be a question you might see, but I have no idea. I was not involved in creating any of the questions, and I have not taken the test. So not violating any NDAs there. So that's kind of that for domain 2, is you'd want to look at the COPC, you want to look at, here's those guiding principles and some of the other information that gets covered in the COPC. So that's really what you'd want to study up on that one. And again, domain 2 is worth 5%. Domain 3, CMMC government and source documents. We're going to hit on that one a little earlier. We'll be going over here just to kind of show you where they are. So current efforts, part 32 of CFR. I think they might mean 32 CFR part 2002. So you could just go to 32 CFR, and if you wanted to go here, down here, 2002, it's going to fall under that grouping of the Information Security Oversight Office of National Archives and Records Administration. If you weren't aware, NARA ISO, this is the executive agent that oversees the CUI program. So since we're dealing with CUI, it makes a lot of sense, right? And then here's CUI part 2002. So this is something you'd want to be familiar with. So moving on, we got the DFARS. That's the supplemental, and that's get you over to 7012. And then we got the technical definition, another DFARS clause. So I would go look at these DFARS clauses, have an awareness of FedRAMP is. That's really more meant for government information systems that are going to require authority to operate. 7012 does mention if you're going to be using the cloud and the cloud has CUI in it, that cloud should be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. The or equivalent hasn't necessarily been fully defined what they mean by that. However, if you do get a 3PO from FedRAMP to give you a letter of attestation, that seems to be fitting the bill pretty well. And that's a pretty safe way to move forward. So CMMC framework tenets. So when we went to 2.0, I think that should be version 2.0, not version .20. We have a streamlined model. So it basically removed the delta 20. You don't really need to know what the delta 20 is because that's not in 2.0. And the goals that they want is to have, reduced assessment costs and reliable. Reliable meaning if you get a C3PO who assesses you and then you get another C3PO to assess you, the results should be relatively near the same. Now, there's always going to be some assessor discretion that you just can't eliminate, but you want them to be reliable and built off kind of the same standards and practices. That's kind of why everybody's required to go through the training. You can't just go do a self-study because then you're not getting the training that kind of gives everybody the same baseline foundations to start from. And then the flexible implementation is really now level 2 is based on 80171, so there's really no difference. The good thing is if other agencies adopt this, the Delta 20 wouldn't necessarily have applied for them. So with 80171, with FAR rules and everything else, when that gets pushed out, CMMC certificates should be adoptable by other agencies, and hopefully they don't all come up with their own CMMC version so that you have to pay for multiple assessments for your 80171. If that's the case, there should be reciprocity, one would hope, between agencies and their 80171 attestations and assessments. So the timeline, this got last fall, so they're kind of expecting that to be in March of 2023, could be May of 2023. We'll find out more, but basically we're on a 9 to 12 month rulemaking. I'm not sure how you get a question on that one, but don't know. Levels of CMMC assessment and requirements, foundational. All right, so we hit on that one before. Looks like they're missing the new level 3, which is expert. But for the CCP exam, you want to know level 1 is foundational. That's where your FAR clause 52.204.21 applies. And that's where the 17 basic requirements for level 1 came from. In the FAR rule, there's actually 15. With CMMC in level 1, they took one of the practices for physical environmental controls and they split it into 3. So it used to have like commas between them. So you have 3 and then you just split it on its side. Now there's the original one and 2 new ones. So that's how you get from 15 to 17. So for the exam, you want to know there's 17 basic for level 1. Level 2, previous level 3, under 1.0 it was level 3, under 2.0 is now level 2, and that's the advanced level. That's where the 80171 is, and that's where you want to assess using the level 2 assessment guide. Self-assessment versus third-party assessment. Define different criteria for every assessment type. That what they're talking about there is this. So for level 1, under 1.0, there was, you had to get an assessment. Under 2.0, level 1, you're still doing self-attestation. You're doing annual self-assessment. You will probably be, when the final rule comes out, you will probably be submitting something to SPURS or SBRS. However, there is no certificates for level 1. Level 2, there will be certificates for level 2. They had a concept of bifurcation where some CUI might be self-attested under level 2. With a phased rollout, that's probably still going to have to be that way. The DoD said that they couldn't think of any data types that are going to allow for bifurcation. But when they said that, I think they were mainly thinking about CTI and not other CUI categories that could potentially be bifurcated out. So when this rollout does roll out, we would expect a phase-in period. It's not going to be in effect for every contract, and nobody's going to have a certificate. It's not going to work that way. So there will probably be still some level 2. But for the exam, what you need to understand is level 1, there is no certificate. Level 2, there is going to be a triennial third-party assessment, which is every 3 years. You're going to have a C3PO, and that's a portion of the level 2, which is not the self-assessment or self-attestation. And then level 3 is going to only be done by government. So that's where your DIBCAC and your DCSA assessors probably will end up playing. One thing to know is that there are assessments at level 3. In order to get assessed at level 3, you have to have a level 2 first. So you have to have your level 2, then you get a level 3 assessment, and level 3 assessments are only done by government officials. So that's what you need to know for the exam. I'm going to edit myself because I could say how I think level 3, they could use the authority of a government and have contractors do it like they're doing right now with the joint surveillance assessments. But for the exam, this is what you need to know right here. This is what you need to know right here. So assessments, where were we? We were right here. We're talking about assessments. So consequences of non-compliance, we've seen a lot of this. If you don't have your certificate or your self-attestation in place in SPURS, then you will not get your contract. You'll have liability because essentially everybody is agreeing and saying, yes, we're meeting 7012, which is the under 171. So that leads to your False Claims Act where they can go after you for that. So task 1 is understand. I missed that for level 2. So let's go back real quick. Task 1, identify and apply the knowledge of the COPC, ISO, ICD, DoD standards. So the ISO stuff is on here. So if you want to know about the ISO, you could go to the IAB. They have a couple things here for ISO, IAC that you could study up on. All right, so we did task 1 for domain 3, demonstrate understanding of FCI and CUI in non-federal unclassified networks. So non-federal means basically covered contractor information system. If you are working on a federal system or a system operated on behalf of the federal government, it's not a covered contractor information system. It's a government information system, and then you follow some different rules, and then you have to go get your authority to operate letters. So CMMC, we're just talking about the non-government systems, the covered contractor information systems. So task 2, determine the appropriate roles, responsibilities, authority for FCI and CUI. So importance of data classification, collection, and analysis. CUI basic versus specified. So CUI basic doesn't have any additional requirements, whereas specified can have additional requirements. So everything that is CUI basic should have the same handling requirements. So understanding where your data is, what data it is, where it's collected, where it's analyzed, where the data flows are, that's all important because that will help you to define your scope. We'll talk about that probably more in domain 6. So you have FCI, we already kind of mentioned that above, federal contractor information, and then you have the FAR, and then you have CUI, and then that part 2002, we already hit on that one. And then you have government authority for identifying, marking CUI, the executive order that came out in 2010 that basically stood up this CUI program, right? So We have the implementing directive as a result of the executive order, and then more recently we have DoD Instruction 5200.48, which is instructing the DoD components on what they should be doing when it comes to the CUI program. So under DoD Instruction 5248, there is some protection requirements in there that you can look at to see what you should be doing when you're protecting it. And you also have the DoD CUI training that's available if you go to dodcui.mil. Oops. I might want to have an HTTPS in front of it. All right, or we can just Google it. Not sure why that's not coming up. Really particular wanted the WW as well. So the training I was talking about is here. You can go to the CDSE. That's kind of the part of DCSA that created it, but you have the DoD awareness training here. And that's not what I was looking for, but that is a good resource as well. Why did they move things? Ah, there it is right here in big. So I was looking down here. There it is right there. So this is the training that I was talking about. So you can take this course. It's free and it's a requirement to take it before you can take the CCP exam within 3 months, as the blueprint says. So that's the training. That's how you get to it. All right, going back here, we can get rid of that. And then part 2002 title will also tell you, I think we have that right here. There's got a bunch of the good definitions. I think that also should have one for lawful government purpose. That's a good one to understand. There's some of the roles and responsibilities for the agency heads. CUI registry, we'll hit on that one a little bit. Safeguarding, that's what I was looking for. So authorized holders must comply with policy in the order of this part and the CUI registry, and review any applicable agency CUI policies for additional instructions. For information designated CUI specified, authorized must also follow procedures in the underlying laws, regulations, or government-wide policies. And then here's where they were talking a little bit about right here, basic versus specified, also is right here. So here is the things you would want to study and understand in case you get any questions on them. Because they're telling you right here, these are things you should know. All right, task 3, demonstrate understanding of the CMMC source and supplementary documents. So here's all those source documents. All of them are available on this ANS website. So you go to the documentation, that'll give you all the links, except for level 3 assessment guide is under development. And then there's the hashing tool. So all those documents there are available right there. The CUI registry, and then the DoD registry. So if you go back to this website, the DoD, is this the one I want? Yes. I think I have to go back. So if I go home, the DoD CUI registry is right here. It's a Excel or a PDF. So basically these are the DoD categories. And if you want to go to the ISO, you can do ISO CUI registry. And that'll get you right here. And then the category list, and it kind of shows you some of them. close that. Here in this, it had the reference to SPEXPT. So if you wanted to go to that one that's export controlled, they'll get you to the SPEXPT. So good things here to understand, not necessarily for the CCP exam, but since I'm here, I'll explain them anyways. You have the description. It's useful, but don't go only off of the description. Here's how you mark it, the banner format. What you want to pay attention to is the safeguarding or dissemination authority. This is more advanced, and this is going to be on the CCP. But when you are a government original classification authority and you're following 5200.48, and it says you're supposed to tell the contractor what's going to be COI on their contract, they should be looking at these dissemination and safeguarding authorities, these CFRs and US codes, to determine whether the information on that contract is going to be a basic or a specified. Again, that's beyond the scope of CCP, but since I was there, that's something I've noticed that a lot of people don't quite understand. They just read this and they go, oh, I'm done. And then they forget all about the dissemination authorities. So this is where the legal authority of why there are dissemination controls come from. All right. So we hit those ones. The NNPI, which is Naval Nuclear Propulsion Information. All right, so the DoD CUI marking aid, you go back to this website, go back to home, you go to desktop aids, that would be your guide for your DoD CUI marking guide. Interesting thing is they differ from the NARA. So they don't add the category to the top and the bottom or the header and the footer. Whereas if you follow the ISO training, it says that you should, and you should put the SP in there in the category. Yeah, these are definitely wrong. Let's see. So they just put header and footer. There is this CUI designation indicator. So you can see that who controls it and also the category where this CUI comes from. So this particular category is privacy. And it does not look like they did any portion marking. Portion marking would be in the front of the paragraphs. That's not a requirement. Here's an example of the portion marking. It's an optional thing, but if you do use it, then it is a lot easier for somebody to make a dissemination decision for review and release. So like if you had this document with CUI, you could see that this sentence, this paragraph is unclassified. So you could potentially release that out versus the CUI, which is not releasable, where it would probably have to be redacted in some form or fashion before it was released. One thing to note is no information is publicly releasable without a review. I want to always stress that. So even if you got something unmarked and you don't know if it's FCI, you don't know if it's CUI, and it's unmarked, doesn't matter. You're not supposed to release it to anybody. Anything you want to release has to go through dissemination, release, and review. So let me get off my soapboxes and get back to here. So anyways, so that was it for the model. So the key things here is to demonstrate understanding of the source material. So the model is the model. If you're going to do an assessment of level 1, you would use the level 1 assessment guide. Assessment of level 2, you would use the level 2 assessment guide. If you need guidance on scoping, there is the level 1 scoping guide and the level 2 scoping guide. And then you have the CAP, which has recently been released in a draft form, the glossary. The CAP will not be on this website. The CAP can be found on the AB website by going to the member areas, downloads, and forums, and it's right here. And they are still accepting comments on that. So let's go back to here. Domain 4 is the model construct and implementation evaluation. So giving a scenario, apply the appropriate CMMC source documents as an aid to evaluate the implementation review of CMMC practices. At a minimum, CMC candidate must be evaluated on CMMC level 1 practices during the CCP exam. So the model architecture, the model levels, there's cumulative nature. As you go up level 1 to level 2 and level 3, you do all the levels below, what those characteristics like. This would probably be the best reference for that, is go to the model and look at, the information on here. So that tiered model assessment requirements. So here you go. This is the good graphic they use. So interesting enough, they have 15 here. That should probably be 17. So over here they have 17. Over here they put 15. Interesting. Yeah, that should be 17 practices for level 1. 110, that's the same as 800-171, full alignment. And then level 3, they haven't fully released that one, but it looks like they're saying there's going to be the 110 here, which includes the 15. It looks like there's going to be 24 additional practices that come out of 800-171 for that one. So that's that cumulative nature, practices, practice description, the numbering scheme. The best thing to do for that, let's go take a look at the model. No, I actually want to go here and go to the model. So when you're looking at the model, what do we have here? We have the levels. And then we have the, this one's 17. Look at that, fun. So the website has 15. This is what they really meant with 17. But for this one, for the particular numbering, here's the numbering scheme. The first part of it will always be the domain and then the level number, L1 for level 1. And then this is the number of the practice or the requirement from 800-171. So you combine those three things together to get the numbering scheme for CMMC. Yeah, there's the explanation there. So for CCP, we have a focus on the level 1s. There will be a spot late in this domain where it kind of hits on it. Yep, right here. So that's very up next, right? So there's 17 of them. There's 4 in the AC domain. There's none in AU, none in AT, none in CM. IA has these 2 here. And so on. So what you would want to do to study is you'd want to go look at, another easy way you could probably do it is you could probably look at the level 1 assessment guide, because that's only going to include the level 1 stuff. So here's all the practices, all the 17, and then you can go here and look at, here's the practice, and then here's the assessment objective and the determination statements below it. And then potential assessment methods and objects. So you have 3 methods: interview, examine, test. Let me see if we're getting there yet. No, not quite there yet. But so that's where you go to review these practices, get an understanding of really what they're talking about. And there's nothing really too crazy in them for the most part. That's the cap. So there's the different practices, and you can review them here too. So any way you want to slice it or look at it, go understand what these things are asking about. So identify information system users, processes acting on behalf of users or devices. See how it has that basically 3 requirements there. So when you go to the determination statements, that'll be broken out into multiple lines. Would it make sense, right? You want to identify any of your users, you want to identify any of those processes that are acting on behalf of users, or the non-person entities accounts, or any devices on your network. Of course, you want to identify those. So just get an understanding of what those practices are. I won't cover them now because you can just read up and study on that. And this is a free video, yay. So let's go to the next. What do we want to look at? That's not what I want to look at. I want to look at this. So here we are. We're now applying the knowledge of the assessment criteria and methodology to the appropriate practices. I was in the right part. Okay, so we have the definition of each practice, the assessment objectives, And the best place to go for all this would be the assessment guide. What for look for in the practice discussion, key references and their applicability to practices. Are they expecting you to understand every single aspect here? So we have further discussion. So when you get to the further discussion, actually rather before you get there. So first you have your assessment methods that you can pick from, and then under each one you have objects that you could potentially look at. You do not have to look at every single one of these things because not every single one of these things will exist. So when you get into discussion, this is still from 800-171, so it's copy pasted over, and they added in the numbering to other requirements there. But then the further discussion is unique to the assessment guide. This does not exist in 800-171, so it gives you some additional guidance on some of these practices. And then it gives you some examples, and then it gives you potential assessment considerations. Do you need to know that what number it is from the FAR? I would say no. That would be unrealistic. And that would be unrealistic to ask to memorize the numbering of the 15 then 17 requirements from the FAR. For in the FAR, when it's in the FAR clause, it's only going to be 15. So understanding the numbering for that for each of them, that's probably not something you need to memorize. If it is, I'm going to give them feedback and say that's not a good question to ask. So go through all these things, understand, read it, comprehend it. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to different communities out there. You have Reddit, you have Discord. The CUI Discord is a great place for more information and discussions. And if you want to get to that one, you just type in CUI Life, CUI.life, and it'll bring you right over to Discord, and then you can join up. So there you go. So if you have questions on any of those practices that you need more information, that's where you should go. Analyze the adequate and sufficiency. So praised evidence is adequate. Do you have enough adequate evidence? So really when you're looking at that, what you should be looking for evidence is these objects. So, and we can take a look to see if they define sufficiency and adequacy in this document. It's defined in some other documents. Yeah, so I'd probably go, so if any time you've run into that, you can go to the glossary and then do search for sufficiency. Am I spelling it wrong? Maybe I'll just look for sufficient. So the two terms are sufficiency and adequacy. I don't want to mess up the definitions, but they don't appear to be here. So that is fun. They should probably be in this SB under 171. It's currently in revision 2. Where did they define these? All right, welcome back. That was a little bit of a struggle, but I found the definitions. So that cap that we talked about, the draft, it has the definitions here. So adequacy is given artifact, interview, response, demo, test. Adequacy answers the question, does the assessment team have the right evidence? So is it the right evidence is it adequate? And then the question for sufficiency, do they have enough of the right evidence? So does it cover the sampling? Does it cover the scope? So that's actually in the cap. Some definitions for adequacy and sufficiency. It surprised me. It's not actually defined in the other source documents. So fun times. We'll move on now. So do I have the right evidence? Do I have enough of the right evidence? And then we're on to domain 5, and actually we're just in the cap, so we'll go back to the cap. So task 1, choose the appropriate roles of the CCP in the CMMC assessment process when developing the assessment plan for phase 1. So here's some of those steps. The cap could be its own video. I guess best case to do for the cap would be to just read and review it, and then look at these tasks here. So there's 4 phases in the cap, and this kind of goes against those 4 phases. So what should the focus be? What is the CCP doing in each of those phases? So how are they assisting and supporting? How are they assisting and supporting? Because a lot of the tasks in the cap are going to be more things that the lead assessor would potentially be doing. Going into task 5, given a scenario, determine the appropriate phase steps to assist. So we're assisting, doing a lot of assisting for the CCP. So reporting, computer's going slow. Reporting is the phase 3. So just kind of quick high level. Phase 1, we're planning and preparing for the assessment. We're creating an assessment plan. Who do we need to talk to? When do we need to talk to them? What things do we need to collect? What tests are we going to observe? All of those things get hashed out in phase 1. Phase 2 is when you're actually going and then conducting that assessment. So I'm going to conduct an assessment. I'm going to follow and execute the assessment plan that's already been worked out. Phase 3, the assessment's over. We're now reporting on those assessment results. And then phase 4 is an optional phase if there are any POAM items. So when they have POAM items, you'll do phase 4. And basically the rules around that are not fully in place yet. However, you can read the cap to understand essentially the levelings for that. Given a scenario, determine the appropriate phase step to assist when reporting. So plan and report assessments. This is probably a good summation of what you probably need to know. So they are essentially assisting on all the phases and steps. So that's going to be a hard one just because it's not a final document and there's been versions of the cap, and the exam probably is not based on the most recent cap that's been released. So that will be an interesting one to see how those questions play out for the cap. So almost there, last domain, scoping. So understanding the high level scoping as described in the assessment process. So this first part, I like to think of your scoping where do the management operational practices need to occur in the business as an organization, right? So the HQ or the organizational unit, that's the top level. And let me see actually if that gets covered in the scoping guide. Oops. All right, so we go to the documentation, we go to the level 1 scoping guide. as I sort of expected, they do not talk about that. So that makes it pretty hard. Let me just double check if the level 2 scoping guide talks about it, because it might. And it does not. So, fun times. I will cover it now then, since you can't really get it anywhere else. So we have the organization. So you can think of that as like the top level owner, HQ. They may not necessarily be in scope. So the host unit is equivalent to the OSC. So the host unit is the OSC that's getting the certificate. In a lot of organizations, the parent might be foreign, and then you have a US-based host unit that's going to be getting their OSC certificate. In some organizations, the organization and the host unit can be one and the same. Like if the entire organization, the entire enterprise is getting a certificate, that's one way how they could be the same. And then the supporting units, those are units within the organization. They could be internal, they could be actually external, but they are supporting that host unit, but they are not in the, they're not processing FCI or CUI in this environment. So supporting units don't have the FCI, they don't have the CUI, so they don't necessarily have to follow all the same rules that the host unit does. And obviously the host unit could be following different rules than the organization. So the way that I view organizational scoping is what parts, what business units, what divisions, what entities, what segments need to follow the CUI protection requirements and the FCI protection requirements for CMMC. So that's one level of scoping. Because when we think of scoping, we're typically thinking of information system scoping, and not necessarily thinking of it in terms of organizational scoping. So that's some older information in there that's still in this blueprint that's not getting covered in the scoping guide. So task 2, given a scenario, analyze the organizational environment to generate an appropriate scope for FCI assets. Because when we're doing CCP, we're focusing on level 1. So when we're doing that, we have the level 1 guide, which is right here. So I close level 1. No, I'll leave it. So level 1 assessment scoping guide. They identify a few different types. So there's the FCI assets. They process, store, transmit FCI. Here's the definitions of those. There's things you would want to read and understand. All right, so out of scope, they do not process, store, or transmit FCI. They're outside the assessment scope, should not be part of the self-assessment. Because remember, level 1 is for self-assessments. Except for when you're doing a level 2 assessment, you're still doing the level 1 assessment, but now it's being done by a third party. So that is one small distinction. So just for purposes of CCP though, and the exam, they are not part of the assessment scope. They're out of scope. And then specialized assets, as discussed in the next change, are out of scope for level 1 assessment. So specialized assets are government property, GFE, government furnished equipment, government systems, IoT, industrial IoT, operational technologies, SCADA, ICS, PLC, CNC machines, all that restricted. Fielded system, obsolete systems. So a lot of times you will have a lab system that's used for troubleshooting, but it has to match something that's fielded, and where it's fielded, it can't be patched. And so you have to leave these unpatched, obsolete systems just in place to do troubleshooting for fielded systems. And then test equipment, those would be your oscilloscopes and microscopes and power meters and special testing. So they're not part of level 1 for CMMC 2.0. And that's why I date my presentations, because CMMC 3.0 might say, hey, it's in scope now. You never know. But for taking your CCP exam, specialized assets are out of scope. Out of scope assets are out of scope. FCI assets are in scope. And you can scope people, technology, facilities, and external service providers, ESPs. Most notably, usually are your MSPs or your managed service providers are going to be an ESP. So there are some differences with the level 2 scoping guide. Not going to be covered on the exam. Not to confuse you, but for level 2, we see that specialized assets are in scope and only out of scope or out of scope. So that's one difference just to be aware of, but I don't expect you would see security protection assets or CRMA. Shouldn't see that on the CCP because the CCP is focused on level 1. However, you never can be sure what's going to happen when people are involved and people make the questions. So I wouldn't expect it, but if you did happen to run across that, you have the other scoping guide as well. So you have your level 1 scoping guide and you have your level 2 scoping guide. When you're doing a CCP level, you should only be really focused on these things here that are on the blueprint. And that is it for the scoping guide and the blueprint. So we'll go back over here, back to this slide. So if you do have any questions, like I said, you can go to the Discord and Reddit, IT security controls, or CMMC, or you can reach out to me. You can email me. You can fill out the contact form at Space Coast Cyber, or you can engage with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. And as a reminder, Space Coast Cyber is a CMMC licensed training provider, so any training that you go through us will qualify you to be able to sit for the CCP exam. And we have courses that are open for registration in October, November, December. I think I'm taking December off actually, and then January and February. So you can look on the website for the latest. But if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll hope to hear from you soon. I hope you found some benefit from this video. I know I'm going to be sitting for the exam in about 2 weeks. So this is my studying as well. So these are the things I have to go over. Obviously, there was a couple things that were a little bit of a hiccup, like that sufficiency and adequacy. Trying to find that definition real quick was hard. So now it's burned in my brain now. Adequate is, what do we say? It's the right evidence. And then sufficiency is it the right amount of that right evidence? So that'll stick with me now. So if I run into any of those on the CCP, I'll be good to go. Anyways, thank you for watching and good luck on your CCP. Till next time.